first of all, thank you so much for coming to Norway House. My name is Christina Carlton, Executive Director here at Norway House. And welcome. I apologize for the construction. This is new for me even this morning that we have limited parking. So we knew about it, but of course, we see the person the first time. Oh, but it's exciting. So we're opening the new building here in late October. So stay tuned for more information around that. First of all, does everybody have a raffle ticket? When you came in, you got a little red raffle ticket because we are raffling off some items. We have the lovely Edvard Grieg Songs from the Heart CD. And actually, Melissa is here and she is banging the CD. So she's good. And then we have a membership. Our membership program is a fantastic way of just staying involved with everything that's happening here. And then we have the Norwegian American paper. If you don't know about the Norwegian American paper, it's out of Seattle. It comes bi-weekly, home to your home. And it's just a fantastic, all-encompassing events and things that are happening in the US, as well as contemporary Norway, that's things are happening in Norway. So advise you to subscribe to that. And then, of course, Bill Halverson diaries, articles, and speeches the book that he's written. I think he's going to talk more about that later. And then accompanying with that is also just Norway House love. So we will raffle off a few things. And I know, Bill, you wanted also to raffle off the 100-year centennial Hundreårsjubileum, which happened in 2007 for Edvard Grieg. So our mission here at Norway House is to connect with contemporary Norway through arts, business, and culture. We do that through our core pillar programs, and Edvard Grieg is one of our 3 core programs here. It's our music arm through our Norway House. Been around for almost 20 years, and it's just a wonderful growing. And this is your part of a big festival this week. So thank you for coming out. We all came to hear Bill and Jim. But first, I would like to introduce our neighbor, our pastor, Gunnar Christiansen from Norway, to introduce Bill Halverson here today. So thank you so much. And I'll be back later to do question Q&A. So.
Thank you so much. And this is really a great honor to introduce Bill Halverson. I guess we all know him, but listen up now. He's a long friend of Norway House, of course, and a member of the advisory committee of the Edvard Grieg Society. And he's widely regarded as America's leading authority on the life and work of Edvard Grieg. Working in collaboration with Grieg scholars in Norway, he has produced English translations of the definitive biography of Grieg, 2 volumes of Grieg's own writings, letters to colleagues and friends, and diaries, articles, speeches, and most of Grieg's song texts. At age 92, he maintains an active schedule of research, writing, and translation, and rarely turns down an invitation to share his knowledge of Grieg and with audiences near and far. Bill's topic today is, as you know, Norway's son and Denmark's son-in-law, how Grieg became Edvard Grieg. We also know that Bill is highly recognized both here and in Norway. He was appointed leader of St. Olav by the Norwegian King Harald a few years ago, an honor that very few people achieve. And Bill is still so young at heart. You know, when I wrote this intro, I realized afterwards that I had first written that his age was 29 instead of 92. Sometimes one might believe that is almost true. Jumali is going to play Grieg during this program. He's a well-known singer, pianist, and organist. He has served in Minikirken and many other churches as organist, and is now co-chair of our Live Festival. Jim has given concerts both in numerous places here in the US and also in Europe. Please welcome Bill and Jim.
The legs are definitely 92 years old. I need help cleaning up on this. Okay. The rest, yeah, thank you, thank you. The rest of me is 29, but my legs are 92. Okay. Well, good afternoon. Thank you for that lovely introduction, and it's wonderful to see all of you. Pleased to have Jim Riley helping me with this program, and he's going to appear at the piano at the proper time. So anyway, greetings to all of you, and greetings to those of you who are watching this program online. I know of a couple of people who planned to be here, but suddenly they're dealing with COVID, so they're watching it online. Prayers as well. A lovely day, lovely to be here, and I look forward to talking today about Edvard Grieg and about Denmark's important role in helping Edvard Grieg to become Edvard Grieg. You've all heard the saying, success has many fathers, but failure is an orphan. Well, Edvard Grieg was undeniably a success as a composer, a pianist, a conductor, but especially as a composer. So understandably, several countries take partial credit for him, all with some justification. Scotland, for example, can point to the name Grieg as derived from the Scottish name MacGregor. The MacGregor clan was on the losing side of an inter-clan war, and all members of the clan were required to stop using the name MacGregor upon pain of death. One branch of the family took the name Grieg, and one member of that family, Edvard's great-grandfather, Alexander Grieg, immigrated to Norway from Scotland in about 1770. Now, as you're looking at that slide, you say, oh, Bill misspelled his name. Did I? Well, as a matter of fact, I didn't. That's how Grieg was spelled in Scotland. Okay, so when Alexander got to Norway, and he told folks his name was Alexander Grieg, and they looked at EIG. Well, EI in Norwegian is pronounced like a long A. So they called him Alexander Grieg, and he didn't like that. So he reversed vowels. So that's how we got Grieg instead of EIG. And all of the Griegs in Norway, including Edvard's branch of the family, are descendants of Alexander Grieg. However, Alexander was the only one of his 8 great-grandparents who was Scottish. So Grieg is genetically 1/8 Scottish. Now, for several reasons, Sweden can also claim a special relationship to Edvard Grieg. First, for most of Edvard's life, Norway was under the Swedish crown. Also, Grieg's first public concert was given in Karlshamn, Sweden in 1861, when he was still a conservatory student. Swedish King Oscar II took personal pride in Grieg's international fame and usually attended his concerts when Grieg performed in Stockholm. Despite the bad blood that developed between Sweden and Norway during the period when Norway was agitating for independence, struggle that ended in 1905 and a peaceful dissolution of the relationship between Norway and the Swedish crown. On June 6, 1907, just 2 years after the break with Sweden, and just a few weeks before his death, Grieg noted in his diary that he had sent a telegram to King Oscar II and his wife, congratulating them on the occasion of their 50th wedding anniversary. And he noted in his diary that, among other things, he said, everybody in Norway should have sent him a telegram as a gesture of thanks because in 1905 he didn't want war. Germany, too, can claim substantial credit for Grieg's development because he spent nearly 4 years there as a student at the famous Leipzig Conservatory, where both Mendelssohn and Schumann had once taught. As a matter of fact, the conservatory was founded by Felix Mendelssohn. In a letter written in 1884 to his Dutch composer friend Julius Röntgen, Grieg, on one of many occasions, expressed how unhappy he was with his experience at the Leipzig Conservatory. To Röntgen, he wrote, "How I envy you your technique, which each day I miss more and more. And it isn't just my own fault either. It is primarily the fault of that damn Leipzig Conservatory where I learned absolutely nothing." There's plenty of evidence, however, that Grieg learned quite a bit at the conservatory, and that he could not have accomplished what he did had he not had the training that he received there. Brilliant artistic achievements are the product of both genius and discipline. The conservatory imposed a discipline that Grieg didn't like at the time, and he didn't like it when he thought about it later on. But it provided a foundation for his future work as a composer. Also, and very importantly, the world-famous German music publisher C.F. Peters' Musikverlag published most of Grieg's music throughout his lifetime. Peters published his Opus 1 for piano pieces, for example, in 1863, when Grieg was just 20 years old. And in 1883, the company began paying Grieg a substantial annual fee in exchange for what could be called first refusal rights to his future compositions. But Peters published most of his compositions throughout Grieg's life. Grieg also had many personal and professional friends in Germany with whom he corresponded throughout his life. He often concertized in Germany during his career. And so there are really many, many reasons why Germany can claim some of the credit for Grieg's accomplishments. So Scotland, Sweden, and Germany can all claim some credit for giving the world the exotic composer that Edvard Grieg became. Next to Norway, however, the country that contributed the most to nourishing Grieg's genius was Denmark. My task today is to explain why this is the case. Grieg returned to his parents' home in Bergen, Norway, with little or no idea of what he was going to do. If you look at that picture of Edvard up there, I think you'll agree with me that he does not look like a promising young composer. He looks like a deer staring into the headlights. If you try to figure out what is he thinking about at that moment, my guess is he's thinking, well, here I am, a fully degreed master of music. What the heck do I do now? He really had no idea. He went back to Bergen and stayed with his parents for a while. Shortly after getting there on May 21st, less than 6 weeks after getting home to Bergen, he gave a public concert at which, among other things, he played 3 piano pieces from his Opus 1 and accompanied a soprano soloist in some of the songs that he had composed. Everything that was performed, there were other compositions performed, but everything performed at this work was something that he had composed during his years at the conservatory. So Jim is now going to play one of the pieces that Grieg played at that concert in Bergen on May 21st, 1862. It's actually his Opus 1, number 1. striking thing about this and the other piano pieces and songs that Grieg composed that performed at the concert in Bergen in May of 1862 is that they don't sound at all like the music we associate with the name Edvard Grieg. They are structurally sound, they're pleasant to listen to, but they could have been composed by anyone with the requisite technical skills who was at home in the world of German Romanticism. One could say that at this point, Edvard Grieg was a competent young composer of German Romantic music. That's the kind of music he learned to compose at the Leipzig Conservatory. The newspaper reviews of this concert were uniformly positive. One reviewer wrote, for example, his compositions were particularly pleasing. As a composer, Grieg seems to have a great future awaiting him. Little did this man know how spot on he was in making that prediction, but how far off he was in assuming that those future compositions would sound like what we just heard. One would think, by the way, that with the kind of encouragement that he got from those very positive news reviews of his concert, that Grieg would have gotten right to work on his next composition. But that's not what he did. As a matter of fact, there's no evidence of any other professional activity during that year. He apparently just kind of sat around dithering about what he should do next. So after a year of inactivity, nearly a year, Edvard did what any enterprising young man would do in such circumstances. He borrowed some money from his father and left home. His destination was Copenhagen. Now, how should I pronounce the name of that city? My Danish friends have tried to teach me how to pronounce it the way they do, and every time I try, I sound like a child who hasn't learned to talk yet. So I'm not going to try to pronounce it there. Are there any Danes here today? Tell us how you pronounce it, please. Copenhagen. Is that close? Oh, good. That's as close as I can get. Well, for me, it's going to be Copenhagen. Okay? American pronunciation. I'm probably American, so I'll pronounce it like an American. Okay. Well, why did Grieg go to Copenhagen? The most compelling reason probably was that Copenhagen was a city with a rich cultural life. It was arguably the cultural capital of Scandinavia at that time. Unlike Bergen, which had only an amateur orchestra, Copenhagen had a professional symphony orchestra, an opera company, a ballet company, and a professional theater, all of which featured performances by internationally famous artists and ensembles. Grieg had developed an appreciation for outstanding professional artistic performances during his years in Leipzig, and he knew he would find similar performances in Copenhagen. He also hoped to make personal contact with two well-known Danish composers, J.P.E. Hartmann and Niels Gade. I'll say more about them in just a minute. But there was a third reason. Grieg also had relatives in Copenhagen. His mother's brother, Herman Hagerup, and his family lived there. Copenhagen seemed an obvious choice, both therefore for personal or professional and personal reasons. Well, what was Grieg's state of mind at this point in his life? Writing about this period many years later, Grieg confessed that when he went to Copenhagen in 1863, he had been more uncertain of himself than at any other time in his life. Didn't want to be merely Norwegian, he wrote to a friend later on, much less to be chauvinistically Norwegian. I just wanted to be myself. I wanted to find expression for the best that was within me, which was something 1,000 miles away from Leipzig and its atmosphere. Grieg had left Leipzig with a fairly comprehensive knowledge of the compositions of Schumann, Mendelssohn, and Wagner, and some acquaintance with the great Germanic composers who had preceded them, especially Bach, Mozart, and Beethoven. Arriving in Copenhagen in April of 1863, Grieg immersed himself in the scores of Hartmann, Gade, and several younger Danish composers who were the proteges of these two masters. In the process, he became aware of the fact that the total atmosphere, the distinctive sounds of Scandinavian music were different from those of German Romanticism. He realized that the sounds of Scandinavian music were closer to what he was looking for. And he reveled in that kind of music. He had not yet found his own voice, but he knew that when he found it, it was going to be a Scandinavian voice, not a German one. Now, as far as we know, Grieg never met Hartmann, but he greatly admired his compositions and acknowledged his influence, both as a role model and as a composer. In 1885, when Hartmann was celebrating his 80th birthday, Grieg wrote, "What musician in Scandinavia is not reminded today of what he owes to Hartmann? The best and deepest thoughts that a whole generation of more or less influential minds have drawn upon were first expressed by him, and it was he who first made them echo within us." Grieg did meet Gade, however, and though he never formally studied with him, Gade did become one of his mentors. The story of how they met, by the way, is quite interesting and rather humorous. Grieg and his Danish friend Gottfried Mathisen Hansen were walking through a park in Copenhagen one day, and by chance they encountered Niels Gade, whom Mathisen Hansen knew personally. "Herr Professor," Mathisen Hansen said, "I want you to meet a Norwegian friend of mine who is a musician." "Is it Nordracht?" Gade asked. "No, it's Edvard Grieg," Mathisen Hansen replied. Gade, who was literally about a foot taller than Grieg, Grieg was a very short man, a little under 5 feet. Gade looked down at the small man standing in front of him and said, "Do you have anything to show me?" "No, I don't," Grieg replied, because he didn't think anything that he had written up to that point was worthy of being shown to this great Danish master. "Well then," Gade said, "go home and write a symphony." So what did Grieg do? He went home and wrote a symphony. He really did. The story of what happened to that symphony is a pretty interesting one, but I'm not going to take time to tell it here today. Hartmann and Gade could be called the establishment composers in Copenhagen in the late 19th century. They were the big names in Danish music. They were the big names of their respective generations. Hartmann was the grand old man of Danish classical music at that time. Gade was his son. Grieg admired them. He studied their compositions. He absorbed influences from them, but he had no desire to follow in their footsteps as a composer. Their voice was not his voice. Fortunately, however, there was also a group of young musicians in Copenhagen at that time whose progressive ideas about music were attractive to Grieg. They are sometimes referred to by music historians as the Young Turks. They could also aptly be called the Young Rebels. The acknowledged leader of this group was a man by the name of Abel Horneman. The other members of the group were Louis Hornbeck, Gottfried Mathisen Hansen, whom I mentioned a few minutes ago, Julius Steinberg, and August Lindley. Grieg became a member of this group shortly after he arrived in Copenhagen, and they quickly became his closest Danish friends. Together, they established a music society that was dedicated to the performance of new music that would be unlikely to be performed by organizations dedicated to the establishment. These young men engaged almost daily in spirited discussions about the future of Scandinavian music. They stimulated each other. They arranged for concerts of each other's music, and they became advocates for each other's music. The influence of this group of Danish friends on the development of Edvard Grieg cannot be overstated. Grieg corresponded with them for many, many years, and much of this correspondence has been preserved. We actually have in existence over 3,000 letters written by Grieg in his own hand. Copies, some of the originals and many copies. And I've translated some over 500 of them in this book called Edvard Grieg, Letters to Colleagues and Friends. And of the over 500 letters in this book, 43 of them are to these 4 Danish friends that I just mentioned. This book has been out of print for many years, by the way. I have a few copies of it that will be available for sale there after, in case you're interested. I think I have 4 copies. Grieg spent the summer of 1864 back in Norway. And during that summer, he spent some quality time with the great violinist Ole Bull. There you see Ole Bull. There's the statue of Ole Bull in Loring Park. I have no idea why. Does anybody know that story? I don't know why it's there. But he was a very famous guy. And there's something of a legend. If you've heard of Oleana, for example. So he was elected in his own time, very popular in America. When he came to America, he used to introduce him. He'd say, "My name is Ole Bull. I'm a Norwegian Norski from Norway." So he wanted to let it be known that he was as Norwegian as you could get. Well, Grieg had actually met Ole Bull in 1858 when he was 15 years old. Edvard was 15 years old. As a matter of fact, it was Ole Bull who had persuaded Edvard's parents to send him to the Leipzig Conservatory. Grieg himself wrote a touching account of that encounter in an autobiographical essay written in 1903, and that is included in this other book, Edvard Grieg, Diaries, Articles, Speeches. I'm showing you a hardcover version of the book, and again, I have a small number of copies available for sale out there. This copy, the paperback version, was republished in a paperback version by the Edvard Grieg Society of America 2 or 3 years ago, and those are available for sale in the Ingebrigtsen's shop out here. But some lucky person is going to get a free copy when the lottery is. It's not called a lottery. Raffle. When the raffle is cashed out. Okay. So in the summer of 1864, however, Grieg, still searching for his own voice as a composer, sought Ole Bull's advice, and he got it. Grieg acknowledged the importance of that encounter with Ole Bull in an interview published many years later. Grieg said in that interview, "It was Ole Bull who first awakened in me the resolve to compose distinctively Norwegian music. He was my rescuer. He opened my eyes to the beauty and originality in Norwegian music. Through him, I became acquainted with many forgotten folk songs, and above all, with my own nature." One day, Grieg reports, he played for Ole Bull a piano piece that he had composed under Gada's influence. We don't know what that was. It probably is something that he later destroyed, as a matter of fact. Bull, according to Grieg, said to him, "Edvard, this is not the way you are destined to go. Throw off Gada's yoke. Create your own style. You have it within you. You must develop a strong Norwegian tonal feeling. You can become famous if you do that. But if you follow in Gada's tracks, you will only wallow in the mud." One could paraphrase Ole Bull's advice like this. It's as if he said, "Edvard, don't be a copycat. Be yourself." So Grieg returned to Copenhagen in October of 1864 and resumed his activities with his young Danish musician friends. His composer's kit by this time contained 4 items, and they're up here. Number 1, the technical skills acquired at the Leipzig Conservatory, that damned Leipzig Conservatory, as he called it. Technical skills acquired there and reinforced by Gade. Number 2, ideals of artistic excellence developed through hearing performances of high professional quality in both Leipzig and Copenhagen. Number 3, an awareness of and commitment to distinctively Scandinavian musical features, thanks to his exposure to the music of Hartmann and Gade, and to stimulating conversations with his Danish friends, the young Turks. And 4, an interest in Norwegian folk music and a desire to write distinctively Norwegian music, thanks primarily to Edvard. What was needed was a spark to ignite Grieg's genius to pull these disparate elements together to create truly inspired music. As luck would have it, that spark appeared at precisely the right time in the person of Richard Nordraak, who is best known as the composer of the Norwegian national anthem. In temperament, Grieg and Nordraak were exact opposites. Grieg was cautious, methodical, prone to self-doubt, whereas Nordraak was the embodiment of fresh self-confidence. Grieg described their first meeting in a letter written in 1881 in these words, quote, "One evening at Tivoli in Copenhagen, I was presented to a young man by the name of Nordraak, who introduced himself in these words, 'Well, shall we 2 great men really meet one another at last?' His bearing," Grieg goes on, "his bearing, his gestures, his voice, everything about him indicated that I was in the presence of a man who considered himself to be the embodiment of Norwegian greatness. And yet there was such a touching naivete and charm about him that he took me by storm. Until that moment, I had never considered the possibility of being or even having the ability to become a great man. I was just a student, nothing more. Moreover, I was timid, shy, and sickly. But this cocksureness was just the medicine I needed. Grieg never grew tired of telling how important Gade was, how important Nordraak was for the discovery of his voice as a composer. In a letter written in 1900, he wrote, "The day Nordraak and I met, he went home with me and sat down at the piano where he sang and played some of his songs and other works. I will never forget the impression. Suddenly it was as if the scales fell from my eyes and I knew what I wanted to do." What Grieg wanted to do was to write distinctively Norwegian music, and that is what he did. He himself tells what happened. "Now," he says, "now came a happy time of excitement and productivity." This was in 1864-65. There in Copenhagen, in daily association with Nordraak and other young people who were enthusiastic about everything Scandinavian. In a short time, I wrote many songs, humoresques opus 6, piano sonata opus 7, and sonata opus 8 for violin and piano. Among the songs to which Grieg is referring are the 4 Melodies of the Heart, opus 5, all of which are settings of texts by one of Edvard's favorite sons, Hans Christian Andersen. The 4 humoresques of opus 6 are the first compositions for piano in which we hear the Grieg that we will all hear more or less consistently in everything that he would go on to write. Grieg had finally found his voice. He told the story of what happened when he first showed his humoresque to Gade. Gade sat and paged through the manuscript without saying a word, Grieg said. Then he began to grunt a little, then a little more, and finally he blurted out, "Tell me, Grieg, is this stuff supposed to be Norwegian? Somewhat hurt, Grieg says, somewhat hurt. I replied, yes, Herr Professor, that's what it is. Clearly, we had thrown off God's yoke, as Oliver had advised, and both Grieg and God knew it. Think back now for a moment to the piece that Jim played for us a few minutes ago. And Jim, back to the piano. Now listen to this piece written just 4 years later. It is number 3 of the 4 humoresques. Amazing contrast. You suddenly sound like Edvard Grieg. Well, does what I've said up to this point make Norway's favorite son Denmark's son-in-law? No, not quite. To be a son-in-law, you have to have a spouse, and Grieg found his spouse in Copenhagen. Her name? He was his first cousin, but they fell in love and got married, despite the disapproval of both her parents and his. Now, there's an old saying, behind every successful man stands a surprised mother-in-law. Well, as Nina's mother contemplated the prospect of having Edvard Grieg as her son-in-law, she was appalled. She reportedly wrote to one of her friends, he is nothing, and he has nothing, and he writes music that nobody wants to hear. But they got married, and Grieg frequently acknowledged that Nina, too, was a powerful influence on him at this critical time. To his American biographer Henry T. Pegg, he wrote, my songs from this period came to light as if they were the products of a natural law, and all of them were written for Nina. Among the songs to which Grieg is referring is his most famous one, Jeg elsker deg, I love but thee, which is one of the 4 songs comprising Melodies of the Harp, Opus 5. I want you now to hear, this has been recorded, by the way, in an English translation by Melissa Holm Johansson. Melissa, are you back there? Yeah, she's sitting back there in one of the comfortable chairs. Anyway, Melissa has recorded 25 of Grieg's songs in English translation in this CD called Songs from the Heart. And one of those is going to be a raffle prize, and we're also available for sale at the I want you to, are we able to play that at this point? Yep. Okay, so we're going to hear it from Melissa's CD. It's track 5. That's it, yeah. Well, it's a fairly short song, but not quite that short. That's not it. Well, apparently you have to buy the CD to hear the whole song. That's a brand new sales technique. Okay, well, thanks for trying. Thanks for trying.
Give me a heads up, I'm gonna perform it for you.
Say again.
Give me a heads up, I'm gonna sing it for you. Here.
Yes, if we had a score, she'd come up and sing it. Jim, you don't know. You know that?
I don't know it by heart.
She was kidding.
Oh, it looks like.
Sorry. I wasn't. Okay. Well, now, in addition to the songs, Grieg has acknowledged that Nina was the inspiration for the composition of his great piano concerto, which was written when he was 25 years old, which would be 43, 63, 68, 1868. So very soon after his time in Copenhagen, he has acknowledged that his piano concerto was written for Nina. It is to this day the most frequently performed piano concerto in the world. Now, mind you, Beethoven wrote 5 piano concertos. Mozart wrote God knows how many, 30-some. So if you take all of them, of course, they would perform more frequently. But of the single piano concerto, the A minor by Edvard Grieg is the most frequently performed piano concerto in the world. And it sounds like this. We didn't have room for the Missile Orchestra up here. So, Edvard Grieg was and remains to this day a son of Norway, indeed one of Norway's favorite sons. But I hope I've persuaded you that he deserves also to be called a son-in-law of Denmark. Indeed, I would like to think that he is Denmark's favorite son-in-law. And now with that, I would be glad to entertain questions if you have any, and somebody will be here with a microphone to take your questions.
Hi there, yes. So at this time, anyone who is online, please feel free to type in your question, and I will give that a few moments and come back to that. But in the meantime, is there anyone here in the audience who has a question?
I'm more interested in that story you wouldn't tell us about. Can you tell us?
Well, they don't want to hear about this. Somebody, do you?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I said some other time. I guess this is some other time, so here it is. I'll give you the short version, okay? The symphony was performed in full or in part 6 times during Grieg's lifetime. But early in his career, he withdrew it from performance, and he wrote on the front of the manuscript, "Must never be performed. Will aldrig uppgörs." I have held that manuscript in my hands. It was awesome. It was like receiving the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai.
Not quite.
For those of you if you didn't hear it online, Pastor Bernard said, "Not quite." Although I will tell you that Mark, Pastor Bernard's predecessors as pastor of Minnesota, said that in order to be a member of Minnesota, you have to love Norway almost as much as you love the Lord. Okay. Well, where was I? Yes, Grieg withdrew it from publication. He's never explained why. Okay. But scholars knew that it was there. He didn't destroy the manuscript, he kept it. So it was among the materials that he willed to the public library in Bergen on his death. So it was available for scholars to go in and look at and study and make comments about, but must never be performed. Now in 1980, they were dedicating a new concert hall in Bergen to be called Grieg Hall, the Grieg Hall. And it was suggested, it would not dishonor the memory of our great composer to play that at the dedication of this hall that is being named after him. There was a 5-member committee that controlled the Grieg materials at the Bergen Public Library. And so the question was put to them, could we not, after all these years, perform that symphony? And so they took a vote. And by a vote of 3-2, they said, no. Aldrig means aldrig. Never means never. So instead, they got a Norwegian composer. Grieg had published 2 movements of this 3-movement symphony in piano reduction. So they got a Norwegian composer to take the piano reduction and to orchestrate it without peaking at Grieg's, orchestration. And that version of the symphony was performed at the dedication of the Grieg Hall. Now, a friend of mine by the name of Dag Edvard, who was a Grieg scholar, one of my very best Grieg scholar friends in Norway, he's no longer living. He was in the process of writing a scholarly article about the symphony that was to be included in the 20-volume set comprising Grieg's complete works with scholarly commentary. And so he went to the library and talked to the librarian and said, could I get a Xerox copy of the score for some scholarly work? And she, of course, said, oh, yes, Professor Sheldon, you know the rules, and you were to keep it safely. It's only available for scholarly use. Yes, he understood that. And so he took it home. He wrote his scholarly article. And a professional colleague of his, knowing that he had that, said, Doc, when you're finished with that, could I borrow it for a while? I would like to do an article on Grieg. And Doc said, oh, sure. He said, Doc was going off to Mexico for the winter. And he said, oh, sure. He said, you know the rules as well as I do, as we kept confidentially. Oh, yes. Well, his colleague didn't follow the rules. His colleague took that manuscript with him to Moscow, where the conductor of the Moscow State Radio Orchestra was a good friend of his, and said, look what I have here. And his friend said, oh, that's wonderful. Do you mind if I copy out the parts and we perform? Well, go ahead. So, sensation. The Grieg Symphony, which had not been performed for over 100 years, was performed on Moscow State Radio Symphony. And of course, immediately other orchestras wanted access to it. And so pretty soon it was being performed in Prague, in Paris, in New York City, and other places all over the world. And now in Norway, they said, my goodness, is Norway going to be the only country in the world where Grieg symphony cannot be performed? So they went back to the committee governing the access to his materials. And once again, they said, and the question was raised, might we not have a public performance of the Grieg symphony? And this time, one of the 5 members changed his vote. And so by a vote of 5-3, they said yes. So in 1983, there was a great big public performance of the Grieg symphony, and it has since then been recorded. And it doesn't sound like the Grieg that we know, but it's a fine symphony. It sounds Scandinavian. I think it sounds more Norwegian than my Norwegian friends think. But I can understand that Grieg would have made the decision that this was a symphony written under the influence of God, and it's not the way I want to be remembered. Okay, that's the probable reason why he would do this. But it's a good symphony. If you have a chance to pick it up, you can get it from Spotify. I'm quite sure. So you can download it online. It's well worth listening to. Just be prepared for an early Grieg, not the Grieg that we all know and love.
You know what this story tells me?
What does that story tell you?
Never trust the Russians.
Okay, are you sure you were from Norway or are you from Ukraine?
We have a
Okay.
question
Yeah.
online.
Yeah, a couple questions online. First of all, do we know how Ole Bull and Edvard Grieg met? Was Bull a friend or of his parents, perhaps, or?
Ole Bull was a distant relative of Grieg's family, quite distant. But the likelihood is that Grieg's parents recognized that their son was quite unusually talented musically. Not that he was such a wonderful piano student. His mother was his piano teacher, and she often complained about him because instead of practicing, he played around on the piano and invented tunes. But they recognized that there was something to that too. So the probability is that they contacted this distant relative of theirs and said, could you come and listen to some stuff that our son Edvard has composed and give us your opinion? Grieg tells the story in his autobiography that was written in 1903. Tells the story of Ole Bull showing up at his home and how in awe he was that this great legend of Norway was actually showing up in his own home. He doesn't say anything about his parents having set it up ahead of time. But everybody who reads this account thinks that's probably what happened. Because Ole Bull asked Edvard to play some of his compositions. So he did. And to our knowledge, only one of those boyhood compositions still exists. It's something that he had written in that very year, when he was 15 years old, 1858. It's something called Larvik's Polka. It has been recorded, and it's kind of fun to listen to. It too is not sung with the Edvard Grieg we know. But Edvard played some of his piano pieces for Ole Bull, and Bull was impressed. And as Grieg tells the story, he said, Ole Bull went off and talked in whispering tones to my parents, and then he came back to me and put his hand on my shoulder and said, Edvard, you are to go to Leipzig to become a musician. And it was done. And that's what happened. They took him out of school. He had not yet graduated from grammar school. They took him out of school at the age of 15 and sent him off to Germany. He did not speak the language very well. There was nobody else there who spoke Norwegian. He talks about arriving, he tells in his autobiography, this autobiographical sketch about arriving there. He said, I felt like my parents sent me there. He said, I felt like a package had been wrapped up and sent to Leipzig. He said, a friend of my father's accompanied me to Leipzig, delivered me like a package to this moving house and disappeared. He said, I wasn't to hear a word of German for a long time, a word of English, a word of, how about Norwegian? But he said, so he said, I spent in pride for the first 2 or 3 days, but I finally decided I had to make the best of it. And so I got busy learning German, and pretty soon he acclimated and he became a good conservatory student. He grumbled about it later, but as I said before, it was a good experience. It was not a pleasant experience for him, but it was a necessary.
Okay, great. Well, I do want to take one more question from online, and then I know we're getting to the top of the hour here, so there's one more from the audience afterwards, but then I think we'll go ahead and wrap up the program. But next online question is, what is your impression of Edvard Grieg as he was portrayed in the 1970 film Song of Norway? Was it particularly accurate or overly dramatized? Were he, Nina, and Ricard all close friends?
Were he and Nina and who?
Ricard.
Ricard Nordrock?
Yep.
Were they all close friends? They certainly all knew each other. He and Nordrock were very close friends. The Song of Norway is profoundly inaccurate historically. It portrays Edvard as a dashing young man who did daring do things, and he was not at all like that. So the portrayal of Edvard is highly unrealistic. It's the Hollywood version of Edvard Grieg. Some of the music that is played is Edvard's music. Quite a bit of it is not. It's a film that Norwegians love to hate, and it's a film that Greek scholars especially love to hate because of its historical inaccuracy. Some people find it entertaining. I've never been able to sit through the whole thing. I've watched parts of it for a while, and I'm not able to tolerate it. But I have a low tolerance for historical inaccuracy. That's part of my job as a Greek scholar.
There we go. Fantastic, thank you. To the audience, any other questions here before we wrap up the presentation today? Yes, hold on one second. Let me get you the mic.
I noticed that Nordrock passed away in 1866, was that?
Yes.
And how did that affect Grieg? And what did he die of?
Nordrock, sadly, Nordrock died of tuberculosis. Shortly after this period that Grieg and Nordrock were together in Copenhagen. Is this still on? Shortly after Grieg and Nordrock were together in Copenhagen, Nordrock left for Berlin. But the two of them had plans to go together. Grieg was to go to Berlin to pick up Nordrock and be there with him for a short time, and then they were going to go to Rome together. When Grieg heard that Nordrock had tuberculosis, he unilaterally changed that plan. He skipped going to Berlin and went directly to Rome. When Nordrock heard about that, he was heartbroken. Clearly, the reason for that was that Grieg was afraid of getting tuberculosis, which was the epidemic of that day. So understandably, he did not go to visit his friend who had tuberculosis. However, Nordrock was heartbroken by that. After Nordrock died, Nordrock's father wrote to Grieg and wrote him a chastising letter, telling him how unkind it was of him to not go to visit Nordrock. Grieg, upon hearing of Nordrock's death, wrote a composition in memory of Nordrock that was played actually at Grieg's own funeral many years later, and is one of his well-known compositions. And on his way back to Norway, he went to Berlin to visit Nordrock's two. So they were very dear friends, very close friends. And the death of Nordrock was, of course, a tragedy of major proportions because he was an important young composer. And as I said before, he was the composer of the Norwegian national anthem. Well, thank you all for your attention. Thanks to you online for watching, and my pleasure to be here.